If you wanted to make a case for the best film director of all time, factoring in elements like the quality of his films, the longevity of his career, the variety of his filmography, the evolution and innovation of his craft, among other things, you'd make a great case for Martin Scorsese. And that isn't even taking into account his works outside of making feature-length films. For sure, there's something about Scorsese that hits different, even to other greats. As well as being almost universally considered the best filmmaker alive, not necessarily at this very moment, but from the directors who are still with us. I mean, the guy made classics in the 1970s, and he's still making top-tier movies today. But it's more than that. Is it the deep, intricate way he dissects films and talks about them in interviews, his encyclopedic knowledge of film history, his reverence for giants of old, the well-known fact that he encourages collaboration and ideas on his film sets, the fact that he taught other acclaimed directors like Spike Lee and Oliver Stone, or his humbleness, who knows? He seems to have gained a reputation in Hollywood as something of a priest of cinema, and no one ever seems to have a bad word to say about him. Perhaps this is why it stung so hard then, when in 2019, in the run-up to the release of his gangster film The Irishman, Scorsese seemed to take aim at the current state of Hollywood, in particular Marvel superhero movies, and fired a bullet whose sound is still being heard today. It's incredible that 5 years on and counting, people in the industry clearly rattled are still talking about Scorsese's comments and pushing back against him. If anything though, in many ways, time is proving Scorsese right, and with the apparent death of the mega-budget blockbuster, the closing down of cinema chains throughout the US, and the slow disenfranchisement, if you'll pardon the pun, of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, it seems Scorsese knows what he's talking about. Plus, he's a man whose recent films have been about death, legacy, and other profound themes. It must make him tear his hair out to struggle to find fundings for such projects when cookie-cutter films are financed for $300 million plus. You know, what boggles my mind is that what Scorsese said isn't even that harsh. Others have attacked superhero films far more vehemently, as we'll look in this video. I think part of the reason why Scorsese got such a backlash is because his voice counts for so much. Francis Ford Coppola criticised superhero films, but he can be dismissed as a man over the hill. Ridley Scott did so too, but he's been a cranky old man for decades. But Scorsese though, he's always been open to new ideas and evolution for cinema. Making a film in 3D, for example, which James Cameron, the director of Avatar, called the best use of 3D in film. So I guess it just stings more coming from him, which is why we got an avalanche of people in the Hollywood industry responding. Personally, I've always been in the anti-Marvel pro-cinema camp, but I'm not a hater of superhero films. I've seen a lot, and I've liked most of the ones I've seen, but they are clearly a different beast. The objective behind them is different to, say, a Federico Fellini film or a Stanley Kubrick picture. In a perfect world, there is space for both kind of movies, all kind of movies, but what Scorsese considers real cinema has been pushed out of the limelight, only being saved by the streaming companies where many artistic directors found their new homes. Perhaps Scorsese's comments were brought on by a feeling of claustrophobic frustration with the landscape of cinema changing for the worse. But what did Scorsese actually say? Well, he remarked, "I don't see them. I tried, but that's not cinema. Honestly, the closest I can think of them, as well made as they are, with actors doing the best they can under the circumstances, is theme parks. It isn't the cinema of human beings trying to convey emotional, psychological experiences to another human being." This is pretty much the statement that triggered people who make Marvel films. It's quite bizarre to me, because the list of people who have taken shots at superhero films includes Anthony Hopkins, Simon Pegg, Gaspar Noé, Sean Penn, Mickey Rourke, Ridley Scott, Quentin Tarantino, and Ken Loach. And that's just a handful who are brave enough to come out and say something, risking being blacklisted from working on a superhero film and taking home a hefty paycheck. Heck, Jodie Foster called modern movies theme park rides in 2018. She used that very phrase before Scorsese even did, and yet we didn't see the kind of pile-on criticism we are seeing of Scorsese. Marty ended up writing an article to clarify his comments, and he also spoke extensively in interviews about this topic. But if anything, he doubled down and went in harder. Here are some of the things he has said. The value of a film that's like a theme park, for example, the Marvel type pictures, where the theatres become amusement parks, that's a different experience. The situation at this moment is brutal and inhospitable to art. And the act of simply writing those words fills me with terrible sadness. Many franchise films are made by people of considerable talent and artistry. You can see it on the screen. I know that if I were younger, if I'd come of age at a later time, I might have been excited by these pictures and maybe even wanted to make one myself. Scorsese has described his own idea of cinema as being as far from the Marvel universe as we on Earth are from Alpha Centauri. Cinema was about revelation, aesthetic, emotional, and spiritual revelation. It was about characters, the complexity of people and their contradictory and sometimes paradoxical natures, the way they can hurt one another and love one another and suddenly come face to face with themselves. Many of the elements that define cinema as I know it are there in Marvel pictures. What's not there is revelation, mystery, or genuine emotional danger. They are sequels in name, but they are remakes in spirit, and everything in them is officially sanctioned because it can't really be any other way. That's the nature of modern film franchises. Market researched, audience tested, vetted, modified, re-vetted, and remodified until they're ready for consumption. They are everything that the films of Paul Thomas Anderson or Claire Denis or Spike Lee or Ari Aster or Catherine Bigelow or Wes Anderson are not. When I watch a movie by any of those filmmakers, I know I'm going to see something absolutely new and be taken to be unexpected and maybe even unnameable areas of experience. What's my problem? Why not just let the superhero film and other franchise films be? The reason is simple. In many places around this country and around the world, franchise films are now your primary source if you want to see something on the big screen. It's a perilous time in the film exhibition. The equation has flipped and streaming has become the primary delivery system. Still, I don't know a single filmmaker who doesn't want to design films for the big screen, to be projected before audiences in theatres. Would I like the picture? He's talking about The Irishman here, back in 2019. To play on more big screens for longer periods of time? Of course I would. But no matter whom you make your movie with, the fact is that the screens in most multiplexes are crowded with franchise pictures. Scorsese also identified Hollywood itself as part of the problem, saying there are some in the business with absolute indifference to the very question of art. The situation, sadly, is that we now have two separate fields. There's worldwide audiovisual entertainment and there's cinema. They still overlap from time to time, but that's becoming increasingly rare. The financial dominance of one is being used to marginalize and even belittle the existence of the other. The most ominous change has happened stealthily and under the cover of night. The gradual but steady elimination of risk. Many films today are perfect products manufactured for immediate consumption. Scorsese also commented on Alfred Hitchcock's movies, whose movies were an event and similar in a way to Marvel theme park movies, but he explains the difference. 60 or 70 years later, we're still watching those pictures and marvelling at them. But is it the thrills and the shocks that we keep going back to? I don't think so. The set pieces in North by Northwest are stunning, but they would be nothing more than a succession of dynamic and elegant compositions and cuts without the painful emotions at the centre of the story or the absolute lostness of Cary Grant's character. The value of a film like that is a theme park film, Marvel type pictures, where theatres become amusement parks. That's a different experience. It's not cinema, it's something else. We shouldn't be invaded by it. So that is a big issue, and we need the theatre owners to step up to allow theatres to show films that are narrative films. Right now, the theatres seem to be mainly supporting the theme park, amusement park, comic book films. They're taking over the theatres. I think they can have those films, it's fine. It's just that those shouldn't become what our young people believe is cinema. It just shouldn't. The danger there is what it's doing to our culture. Because there are going to be generations now that think movies are only those. That's what movies are. They already think that. Which means that we have to then fight back stronger. And it's got to come from the grassroots level. It's got to come from the filmmakers themselves. And you'll have, the Safdie brothers, and you'll have Chris Nolan, you know what I mean? And hit him from all sides. Hit him from all sides and don't give up. Let's see what you got. Go out there and do it. Go reinvent. Don't complain about it, but it's true, because we've got to save cinema. Manufactured content isn't really cinema. It's almost like AI making a film. And that doesn't mean you don't have incredible directors and special effects people doing beautiful artwork, but what does it mean? What do these films, what will it give you? Aside from a kind of consummation of something and then eliminating it from your mind, your whole body, you know? So what is it giving to you? I mean, I really don't see what people are complaining about. There is so much nuance and care in his argument. Care for the art form, care for future generations. He articulates the issue well, and it basically boils down to risky artistic movies are no longer being made and seen on a wide scale. And he talks about the effects, like infantilization, that this has on society. But his comments caused a huge backlash. He kind of became known as this old man who hates modern movies. His own daughter once playfully trolled him. The Marvel show Loki even responded with a scene where a character says to another, "A movie looks scary," and he replies by saying it's not scary, it's an elevated thriller, it's cinema, thank you very much. But that just comes off as dumb to me, as if the show wants to huddle its sheltered viewers and say, let's not let the bad old man hurt us. The fact is, if you haven't experienced, say, Harakiri or Wild Strawberries, and the pinnacle of your cinematic experience is the Avengers Endgame, I'm sorry, but there is a limit to how seriously your opinion can be taken on this subject, and not instead relegated to tribalism. Because frankly, it isn't an informed opinion until you've gotten a taste from the different spheres of cinema. There are those who chimed in favour of Scorsese or shared his criticism of Marvel cinema. John Woo, for example, action movie legend who made films like Hard Boiled and Face Off, said, "I've never liked watching movies with big special effects or anything based on comic books. I prefer Martin Scorsese's movies, that kind of cinema. I can't wait to watch Killers of the Flower Moon. I like old-fashioned movies, you know, real cinema. There aren't many movies like that lately." Quentin Tarantino has his own laments of superhero movies, saying, "You have all these actors who have become famous playing these characters, but they're not movie stars, right? Captain America is the star, or Thor is the star. I mean, I'm not the first person to say that. I think that's been said a zillion times, but it's like, you know, it's these franchise characters that become a star. You have to be a hired hand to do those things. I'm not a hired hand. I'm not looking for a job." And on Scorsese, he said, "It's like he's an old man. What do you think? Scorsese would be into Ant-Man versus the Wasp? He's not going to be. I don't believe he would have been into that at 37. Forget about how old he is now." Francis Ford Coppola was ferocious in his comments, saying, "When Martin Scorsese says that the Marvel pictures are not cinema, he's right, because we expect to learn something from cinema. We expect to gain something, some enlightenment, some knowledge, some inspiration. I don't know that anyone gets anything out of seeing the same movie over and over. Martin was kind when he said it's not cinema. He didn't say it's despicable, which I just say it is." Simon Pegg, who's been in many movies of the ilk that Scorsese criticises, has also weighed in. "I'm very much a self-confessed fan of science fiction and genre cinema, but part of me looks at society as it is now and thinks we've been infantilized by our own taste. We're essentially all consuming very childish things. Comic books, superheroes. Adults are watching this stuff and taking it seriously. It's a kind of dumbing down because it's taking our focus away from real world issues. Films used to be about challenging emotional journeys. Now we're not really thinking about anything other than the fact that the Hulk just had a fight with a robot." Ridley Scott has said, "The best films are driven by the characters, and we'll come to superheroes after this if you want, because I'll crush it. I'll fucking crush it. They're fucking boring as shit." James Cameron, director of Aliens, The Terminator and Avatar, has said, "I'm hoping we'll start getting Avenger fatigue here pretty soon. Not that I don't love those movies, it's just, come on guys, there are other stories to tell besides hypergonadal males without families doing death-defying things for 2 hours and wrecking cities in the process." Jon Favreau, who directed a few Marvel movies and even starred in a Scorsese movie, spoke about Scorsese and Coppola, saying, These two guys are my heroes, and they have earned the right to express their opinions. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if they didn't carve the way. They served as a source of inspiration. You can go all the way back to Swingers. They can express whatever opinion they like. But there are many who are critical, especially those who have been involved in these kind of movies. James Gunn, director of Guardians of the Galaxy, responded to Scorsese saying, "Martin Scorsese is one of my 5 favourite living filmmakers. I was outraged when people picketed The Last Temptation of Christ without having seen the film. I'm saddened that he's now judging my films in the same way. That said, I will always love Scorsese, be grateful for his contribution to cinema, and can't wait to see The Irishman. And I'm not saying religious zealotry is the same as not liking my movies or in the same category. What I'm saying is I'm not fond of people judging things without actually seeing them, whether it's a movie about Jesus or a genre." I think Gunn is missing the point here. The very fact that you can pretty much judge a Marvel film without having seen it is literally what Scorsese is talking about, that these movies all have a sameness to them and you forget about them after you've watched them. And in 2021, about 2 years later, Gunn again said, "I just think, he just seems awfully cynical, that he would keep coming out against Marvel and then that's the only thing that would get him in the press for his movie. And then he just kept coming out against Marvel so that he could get press for his movie. So he's creating his movie in the shadow of the Marvel films. And so he uses that to get attention for something that he wasn't getting as much attention as he wanted for it." I mean, this is pretty unflattering and insincere in my opinion, and comes off as having your nerve touched. Did Gunn really sit there for 2 years and then decide Scorsese is blasting Marvel because it gives him press for his own film? That's the only thing that's getting Scorsese press for his films? Get a grip on yourself, man. Gunn added, "There are a lot of things that are true about what he said. There are a lot of heartless, soulless, spectacle films out there that don't reflect what should be happening. I mean, I can't tell you the amount of times I've talked to film directors before they went in and made a big movie and said, 'Hey, we're in this together. Let's do something different with these big movies. Let's make them something different than everything that's come before them.' And then they see them just go and just cater to every single studio whim or what's thought of, and just be grossed out, frankly." Oh, so you basically agree with Scorsese then? Which is it? Tom Holland, who has played Spider-Man in the recent Marvel movies, has said, "You can ask Scorsese, would you want to make a Marvel movie? Because he doesn't know what it's like because he's never made one. I've made Marvel movies, and I've also made movies that have been in the conversation in the world of the Oscars. And the only difference, really, is one is much more expensive than the other. But the way I break down the character, the way the director etches out the arc of the story and characters, it's all the same, just done on a different scale. So I do think they're real art. When you're making these films, you know that good or bad, millions of people will watch them. Whereas when you're making a small indie film, if it's not very good, no one will watch it. So it comes with different levels of pressure. I mean, you can also ask Benedict Cumberbatch or Robert Downey Jr. or Scarlett Johansson, people who have made the kinds of movies that are Oscar-worthy and also made superhero movies. And they will tell you that they're the same, just on a different scale. And there's less spandex in Oscar movies. My thoughts on Holland's argument is that they're pretty shallow and fallacious. Scorsese can't comment on superhero films because he's never made one. Can I not comment on the food that I had at the restaurant last week because I'm not a chef? Can I not have an opinion on the latest songs because I'm not a musician? You have to have literally made a Marvel movie to have an opinion of them. And the argument about scale. So, the difference between Transformers, Revenge of the Fallen, and Akira Kurosawa's High and Low is that one was more expensive than the other. He really doesn't see a difference in the craft. Nicolas Cage, nephew of Francis Ford Coppola, wasn't very happy with the comments made, saying, "Yeah, why do they do that? I don't understand the conflict. I don't agree with them on that perception or opinion. Marvel has done a really excellent job of entertaining the whole family. They put a lot of thought into it. It's definitely had a big progression from when I was doing the first 2 Ghost Rider movies. Kevin Feige, or whoever's behind that machine, has found a masterful way of weaving the stories together and interconnecting all the characters. What could be wrong with wholesome entertainment that is appealing to parents and children and gives people something to look forward to? I don't see what the issue is. I think that the movies I make, like Pig or Joe, are not in any kind of conflict with Marvel movies. I don't think the Marvel movie had anything to do with the end of the tweener. By tweener, I mean the 30 million to 50 million budget movie. I think movies are in good shape. Robert Downey Jr., the flag bearer of the MCU as Iron Man, said it didn't make sense to say the MCU isn't cinema, but added wisely, I appreciate his opinion because I think it's like anything. We need all the perspective so we can come to the center and move on. Of course he's not jealous of the success. He's Martin Scorsese. By the way, there is a lot to be said for how these genre movies, and I was happy to be a part of the problem, if there is one, but how they have denigrated the era, the art form of cinema. When you come in like a stomping beast and you eliminate the competition in such a demonstrative way, it's phenomenal. It's interesting that Downey appreciates Scorsese's comments by sheer virtue of him saying something different and against the grain in order to better our perspective. Samuel L. Jackson, who's been in the likes of Scorsese and Tarantino movies, but also many of the Marvel movies as Nick Fury, was rather nonchalant about the whole thing. That's like saying Bugs Bunny ain't funny. Films are films. Everybody doesn't like his stuff either. Everybody's got an opinion. So I mean, it's okay. Ain't going to stop nobody from making movies. Chris Hemsworth, another MCU regular who's been talking about Scorsese's comments as recent as this year of 2024, he said, speaking about Scorsese and Tarantino's criticisms, "That's super depressing when I hear that. There goes two of my heroes I won't work with. I guess they're not a fan of me. I'm thankful that I have been a part of something that kept people in cinemas. Now, whether or not those films were to the detriment of other films, I don't know. I don't love when we start scrutinizing each other when there's so much fragility in the business and in this space of the arts as it is. I say that less to the directors who made those comments, who are all, by the way, still my heroes, and in a heartbeat I would leap to work with any of them. But I say it more to the broader opinion around that topic. I don't think any of us have the answer, but we're trying. It felt harsh, and it bothers me, especially from heroes. It was an eye roll for me, people bashing the superhero space. Those guys had films that didn't work too. We all have. When they talked about what was wrong with superheroes, I thought, cool, tell that to the billions who watch them. Were they all wrong? And cinema going did not change because of superheroes, but because of smartphones and social media. Superhero films actually kept people in the cinemas during that transition, and now people are coming back. Putting aside to how it made him feel personally, I think these are not great arguments. How many people watch a movie is not an indicator of the film's quality or its ability to affect an audience. Did he even read Scorsese's actual criticism? The whole point is that real cinema is not being put in front of audiences enough, that superhero films are dominating the screens and are the only thing people can watch, and your response is, look, so many people watch superhero movies. And it's definitely not true of recent times, with a lot of tentpole franchise movies underperforming at the box office in 2024. Kumail Nanjiani, the comedian who has become a part of the MCU, has comments which didn't really speak to the issue, but rather the reaction to Scorsese's comments. I obviously love the movies Tarantino makes or Scorsese makes, and I may disagree with Scorsese's opinion on superhero movies, but I mean, who else has earned the right to have an opinion? If Scorsese hasn't earned the right to have an opinion on movies, then none of us should have an opinion on movies. It's so strange that people get upset about it. Joaquin Phoenix would rather the likes of Scorsese not be so snobbish, it seems, saying, I think they make some great fun movies. There's nothing wrong. I'm not a fucking, cinephile. I'm not a snob, and I'm totally fine with... I enjoy those movies sometimes, and I think they keep the fucking industry going in some ways, so I don't have a problem with it at all. Danai Gurira, who starred in Black Panther, has said, Well, I've worked very closely with Ryan Coogler. My experience working under his helm, it's definitely deeply cinematic in every way I can imagine. We're not leaving anything at home. We're bringing it all. We're bringing our understanding of our culture, understanding of our humanity, of our gender, of the complexities therein of this world that we're in, and all these specificities of this world. We have to come in and pour all we've got into this franchise. And that's what we definitely do. We didn't get through either movie and be like, oh, that was nothing. No, it was all we had. It was all we had and then some. So I hope that's cinema to somebody. Scarlett Johansson had some interesting thoughts. It's interesting because a couple of people in the past couple of days have mentioned to me that a couple of extremely esteemed directors have been really vocal about how the whole Marvel universe and big blockbusters are really like despicable and the death of cinema. At first I thought that seemed kind of old-fashioned, and somebody had to explain to me, because it seemed so disappointing and sad in a way. They said, I think what these people are saying is that at the actual theatre, there's not a lot of room for different kind of movies. There's not a lot of room for different kinds of movies, or smaller movies, because the theatre is taken up by huge blockbusters. Johansson added it made her consider how people consider content now due to the huge sea change of viewing experiences. But Chris Evans, another MCU original, added, I think original content inspires creative content. I think new stuff is what keeps the creative wheel rolling. I just believe there's room at the table for it all. It's like saying a certain type of music isn't music. Who are you to say that? Mark Ruffalo, who was in a Scorsese film but is also an MCU regular, responded by pondering on the finances. If we're living in a world where economics are how we measure the value of a society, then yeah, whoever makes the biggest thing is going to dominate. They are going to try and keep making it again and again. In that article, he said something really interesting, and I wish he took it all the way. He said, I am not suggesting that we subsidize films. But that's exactly what he's suggesting. We should have a national endowment of the arts that gives money to another kind of cinema and does support another kind of cinema. If you're working in the milieu of, I'm going to try and make a movie that has economic success, which he does too, by the way, then how can you complain about that system when you're not on top of it anymore? I would love to see Marty create a national film endowment, and he could do this, that lets young, new talent come in that isn't just driven by the marketplace, but driven by precepts of art. That would be amazing. That's really the crux of this conversation. Ruffalo makes some interesting points, but I wonder if he knows that Scorsese is the founder and chair of the Film Foundation, whose mission is to restore and archive films from across the world. It also offers educational programs to teach young people about film language and history. I don't think it's fair to suggest Marty isn't doing his part. He's doing more than most. Elizabeth Osland, another MCU player, was disheartened with the idea that Marvel projects are considered a lesser type of art, but she steered the conversation towards the film crews, saying, I'm not saying we're making indie art films, but I just think it takes away from our crew, which bugs me. These are some of the most amazing set designers, costume designers, camera operators. I feel diminishing them with that kind of criticism takes away from all the people who do award-winning films that also work on these projects. From an actor's point of view, whatever, I get it. I totally understand that there's a different kind of performance that's happening. But I do think throwing Marvel under the bus takes away from hundreds of very talented crew people. That's where I get a little feisty about that. Taika Waititi, who started off making oddball comedies like The Hunt for the Wither People and What We Do in the Shadows, before becoming an MCU director, said, Of course it's cinema, it's at the movies, it's in cinemas near you. Alright, whatever that means. Paul Rudd, who played Ant-Man, said, I love Martin Scorsese, I love his movies, I can't wait to see The Irishman. I thought I was going to be asked this at some point, and I have been. I think it's really it just seems to be what the state of interviews are now, and I have no opinion about it. Okay, so another person who doesn't really want to give his opinion on it. Simon Liu has an interesting perspective. If the only gatekeepers to movie stardom came from Tarantino and Scorsese, I would have never had the opportunity to lead a $400 million plus movie. I am in awe of their filmmaking genius. They are transcendent auteurs, but they don't get to point their nose at me or anyone. No movie studio is or ever will be perfect, but I'm proud to work with one that has made sustained efforts to improve diversity on screen by creating heroes that empower and inspire people of all communities everywhere. I love the Golden Age too, but it was white as hell. So he's gone for a diversity argument, for which there is room, but could you counter that by arguing that if Shang-Chi flopped, does he think he would still be headlining a $400 million movie after this? Hollywood doesn't care about diversity. It's all about what puts bums in seats. And again, Silence, Kundun, Killers of the Flower Moon, these are all movies which gave opportunities to native actors, actors of colour. When did Scorsese say anything about the golden age of Hollywood? If anything, that's a strawman argument. Ryan Reynolds seems to object not only to Scorsese's Marvel criticism, but also the idea that his movies should be watched at cinemas. You should be able to watch whatever the fuck you want to watch on whatever fucking device you want to watch it on. I don't know. I would say that's just the way things are. Ethan Hawke has an interesting voice in the argument, having a role in a Marvel series, but of course being known for working in independent movies, original movies, the kind of films Scorsese wants more of. He said, "If people like Scorsese and Coppola don't come out to tell their truth about how there are more important things than making money, who's going to? It's easy for them, but it needs to be somebody in the community saying, hey, everybody, this is not Fanny and Alexander. If you keep reviewing these movies that are basically made for 24-year-olds like the Fanny and Alexander or Winter Light, then who the hell's going to make Winter Light? I appreciate the elder statesmen of the community reminding people not to set the bar too low. I know it makes some people think they're stuck up, but they're not stuck up." He added intelligently, talking about Marvel, "That group of people is extremely actor-friendly. They might not be director-friendly, and that could be what Scorsese and Coppola are talking about." There is of course not a lot of creative individualism allowed in the MCU, which might be what Hawke is referring to. Think to Edgar Wright wanting to make a Ant-Man movie for years, but leaving the project because he fought with the studio over making the film fit into the MCU. Chadwick Boseman, the star of Black Panther, had said, "The thing is, I am not just on Team Marvel, I am part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but you want all types of movies." And even in his extended comments, he admits there is a criteria for what cinema is. It could happen in a superhero movie. I am not going to jump on an argument on one side about it. He has a great opinion. He's a genius at what he does, so he's obviously not wrong. But it is an opinion, and he's not completely right either. Director James Mangold, who has made some good movies and of course gave us a bit of a different superhero film with his Wolverine picture, said, "As fewer and fewer movies make it to the screen, we all start squabbling with each other about who is making better and more important films. I think the reality is we're all making important films. We just wish there was more real estate for them to get up on a big screen." The writer Damon Lindelof said, "There's a space in Marvel movies that they are beginning to explore and are beginning to be provocative and interesting. Logan or Black Panther are very close in my opinion to cinema, and to put all Marvel movies in the same box doesn't seem fair. I'm just curious as to how many Marvel movies he has seen. I don't view it as a put down. I think there has to be space for popular entertainment and indie fare and cinema." George Miller, director of Mad Max, also shared his opinion on superhero movies. "I watch all of them. To be honest, in terms of this debate, cinema is cinema and it's a very broad church. The test ultimately is what it means to the audience." There's a great quote I saw that applies to all we do. It was from the Swahili storytellers. Each time they finished a story, they would say, "The story has been told. If it was bad, it was my fault because I am the storyteller. And if it was good, it belongs to everybody." It's a mistake and a kind of hubris if a film does well at the box office to dismiss it as clever marketing or something else. There's more happening there, and it's our obligation as storytellers to really try and understand it. To me, it's all cinema. I don't think you can ghettoize it and say, oh, this is cinema or that is cinema. It applies to all the arts, to literature, the performing arts, painting and music, in all its form. It's such a broad spectrum, a wide range, and to say that anyone is more significant or more important than the other is missing the point. It's one big mosaic and each bit of work fits into it. Benedict Cumberbatch had his say also. "I know there's been a lot of debate recently with very fine filmmakers coming to the fore saying these film franchises are taking over everything, but lucky us actors who get to do both kinds of variety at either popularity in terms of budgeting. I agree, we don't want one king to rule them all and have a monopoly on that. Hopefully that's not the case, and we should really look into continuing to support auteur filmmaking at every level." The Russo brothers, who made several MCU movies, seemed quite upset at Scorsese's comments, as well as seeming to take cryptic shots at Scorsese in social media posts. They said, "Ultimately, we define cinema as a film that can bring together people to have a shared emotional experience. When we look at the box office of Avengers Endgame, we don't see that as a signifier of financial success, we see it as a signifier of emotional success. It's a movie that has had an unprecedented impact on audiences around the world in the way that they shared that narrative and the way that they experienced it and the emotions they felt watching it. Really, back to the bums in seats argument. Bruce Campbell, star of the Evil Dead movies, didn't hold back. He was ragging on Marvel movies, right? Martin Scorsese is one of our greatest filmmakers, so when he says stuff like that, it hurts. Because it's not like movies like that are easy to make, and it's not like The Irishman doesn't have digital effects out the ass. The Irishman has more digital effects than any Marvel movie, I can tell you right now. To get Robert De Niro to go from 9 to 108, that's a lot of work. That's a lot of digital work. So he's kind of full of crap in that respect. Every movie is just as fake as the other. Nothing is real. Guess what? You're doing a real story about Erin Brockovich. That's not even what Erin Brockovich looks like. It's not a real story, even though they say it's a real story. So nobody gets to play, I am a filmmaker, you make silly Marvel movies. No, they're all bullshit. Every single bit of every movie is bullshit. Good bullshit, lousy bullshit, boring bullshit. They're all as fake as you can get. I mean, I don't mean to stop him in his tracks, but he seems to be responding to an argument Scorsese never even made in the first place. To say, oh, but The Irishman had CGI too, is the shallowest of responses possible to this debate. Kevin Smith has a strange take. For my money, I think Martin Scorsese made the biggest superhero movie ever, which was The Last Temptation of Christ. Huh? What? But he continued. My feeling is, Martin Scorsese never sat in a movie theatre with his dad and watched the movies of Steven Spielberg in the early 80s or George Lucas in the late 70s. He didn't feel that sense of magic and wonder. I can still step into one of those comic book movies, divorce myself of that fact that I do this for a living, release, and my dead dad is back for a minute, for 2 hours. And it's personal for a lot of the audience. You know, we're not arguing whether or not it counts as cinema. These Marvel movies come from a core. They come from a happy childhood, and they're reflections of a happy childhood. He's not wrong, but at the same time, neither are we for loving those movies, and they are cinema. Alan Moore, who wrote pioneering comic books, had quite a cracking take. I think the impact of superheroes on popular culture is both tremendously embarrassing and not a little worrying. While these characters were originally perfectly suited to stimulating the imagination of their 12 or 13-year-old audience, today's franchise Übermenschen, aimed at a supposedly adult audience, seem to be serving some kind of different function and fulfilling different needs. Primarily, mass-market superhero movies seem to be abetting an audience who do not wish to relinquish their grip on A, their relative reassuring childhoods, or B, the relatively reassuring 20th century. The continuing popularity of these movies to me suggests some kind of deliberate self-imposed state of emotional arrest, combined with an numbing condition of cultural stasis that can be witnessed in comics, movies, popular music, and indeed right across the cultural spectrum. The superheroes themselves, largely written and drawn by creators who have never stood up for their own rights against the companies that employ them, much less the rights of a Jack Kirby or Jerry Siegel or Joe Shuster, would seem to be largely employed as cowardice compensators, perhaps a bit like the handgun on the nightstand. I would also remark that save for a smattering of non-white characters and non-white creators, these books and these iconic characters are still very much white supremacist dreams of the master race. In fact, I think that a good argument can be made for D.W. Griffin's Birth of a Nation as the first American superhero movie, and the point of origin for all those capes and masks. George Lucas, creator of Star Wars, recently said, "Look, cinema is the art of the moving image, so if the image moves, then it's cinema." I think Marty has kind of changed his mind a little bit. Film critic Mark Kermode also shared his take. Some Marvel movies are great. Some Marvel movies are not great. It bothers me when filmmakers who should know better decide to announce the problem with cinema is fairground ride movies. No, it isn't. You don't have to go and see superhero films. You could go and see films like Past Lives. Jordan Peele said, "I'm not particularly engaged in the what is cinema, what isn't cinema conversation. My definition of film and what my movie experience is movies that you can go and have a theatrical experience, a shared experience with an audience and go through emotions, cheers, tears, laughs. Alfred Molina, who played Dr. Octopus in the Spider-Man films, had a mature take. Film is a very broad church and there's room for any kind of denomination. Ultimately, the making of those movies isn't the problem. The problem is the inequitable distribution of available funds for making movies. Do films really have to cost $300 million? Do those films have to have $150 million spent on them in order to get an audience? Whatever the accountants may say, whatever the economics of it, there's a kind of inequality with that. I'd like to see some of that Premier League money go down to the lower leagues. For all the kind of egalitarian sheen we like to put on this business, there's not a lot of it in real terms. Stellan Skarsgård has said, "I've got nothing against superhero movies. I've been in a couple and they definitely have a place. The problem is that the system that allows 8 people to own half of the wealth in the world enhances the power of the market force. So small and independent cinemas rarely exist anymore outside a few big cities. There's no distribution channels for all the mid-budget films that have the best actors, the best writing, because they can't throw up $3 million for a marketing campaign. When cinemas let them in, they do so for 1 week, and if it doesn't pay off in a week, they're gone. Remember that The Godfather first opened in 100 cinemas in the United States. Big films now open in 4,000. They had small ads in the New York Times, but it grew and grew because it was such a good film. The people's opinion has no chance anymore, and that is sad. I think that we should have Marvel films and more rollercoaster films. We should have other films too. And that's the sad thing. When raw market forces come in, studios start being run by companies that don't care if they're dealing in films or toothpaste, so long as they get their 10%. When AT&T took over Time Warner, it immediately told HBO to become lighter and more commercial. They were always making money, but not enough for an investor. The showrunner of X-Men 97, Beau DeMay, on Twitter shared a video of Zack Snyder's Justice League and said, spelling Scorsese's name wrong, "Sorry Scorsese, this is cinema. Everything, the aspirational shot design and music, the fight choreography, Clark going from sauntering with heavy burden to soaring and smiling, sell the hope and power of an outsider discovering he's too big for his adopted home." Christopher Nolan, one of Hollywood's most famous and celebrated contemporary filmmakers, has said, "A healthy ecosystem in Hollywood is about a balance between the two things and always has been. It's always been a big part of the economics of Hollywood. It pays for lots of other types of films to be made and distributed." Sebastian Stan, who played Buck in the MCU, said, "All I know is that all movies affect people. I've certainly experienced firsthand many people who have been affected and helped by Marvel movies." Paul Schrader, who wrote a few of Scorsese's movies like Taxi Driver and Raging Bull, had an interesting take. "No, they are cinema. So is that cat video on YouTube. It's cinema. It's kind of surprising that what we used to regard as adolescent entertainment, comic books for teenagers, has become the dominant genre economically." So what about some of the studio heads? Well, Kevin Feige responded to Scorsese saying, "I think that's not true. I think it's unfortunate. I think myself and everyone who works on these movies loves cinema, loves movies, loves going to the movies, loves to watch a communal experience in a movie theatre full of people. Everybody has a different definition of cinema. Everybody has a different definition of art. Everybody has a different definition of risk. Some people don't think it's cinema. Everybody is entitled to their opinion. Everybody is entitled to repeat that opinion. Everyone is entitled to write op-eds about that opinion. And I look forward to what will happen next. But in the meantime, we're going to keep making movies." Disney chief Bob Iger has said, "I don't think he's ever seen a Marvel film. Anyone who's seen a Marvel film could not in all truth make that statement. I don't get what they are criticizing us for when we're making films that people are obviously enjoying going to, and they're doing so by the millions. Martin Scorsese is a great filmmaker. I admire him immensely. He's made some great films. I would debate him on this subject. First of all,
Marvel's making movies. They're movies. That's what Martin Scorsese makes, and they're good movies. We're in the business of making money. We're in a profitable business. At the same time, at Disney, we're trying to balance that with telling great stories to the world and infusing them with great values, and supporting an employee base of well over 200,000 around the world with great care and, frankly, respect. And he also added that he thought the comments were disrespectful. So there you have it, a whole heap of people who have weighed in and have had their say on Martin Scorsese saying superhero films aren't cinema. Where do you stand on this debate? Do you agree with Scorsese, or does he need to get off his high horse? Let me know down in the comment section below. Subscribe to the channel, and thanks for watching.